So here we are at week 3 of this study. I feel like it's been great to study, but there's been so much to say, so much more to say in almost each topic. It's like a universe of topics in a 3-week study, and each one of them could be its own deep dive, and might be. And in fact, I'm going to put out some content on the site in the future about some of that content a little bit deeper. So if you, and most of you are, but if you're listening online, make sure you sign up so that you don't miss that. And then if certain topics become kind of perennial, we'll do another deep dive. Maybe we'll go into one of them together as a group again, and we'll give it a week or two and see how we do with that. But thank you for your diligence and your sticking with it. It's in the questions and the conversations through the week, that's been good for me to hear. A lot of the conversations I've had with people about their own experiences have only further solidified the consistency of this topic and these traditions. So it's super fascinating to see that. And I didn't anticipate that. When we started this, I thought we would look at this from an arm's length, but it turns out a lot of people have very meaningful personal experiences. And I find that just what I've learned from all of you has helped me grow and learn as well. So the final week, but like I said, in week 1, it's sort of a circle. We're back to the world of souls again. We began at the world of souls. We looked at life, and here we are back in this place, right? This, however we want to look at it, again, or here we are, right? Back at the world of souls. Last week, we looked specifically at the life on Earth. What does the soul do on Earth? What is the soul here for? We looked at the challenges and how our personal program will be reflected in our lives. And the sooner we recognize that God has us on a development program, the more we can tap into that worldview and that mindset, and we can make better decisions and not just react all the time. And of course, the Hebrew concept is imuna. So that's effectively imuna. And that's why we're doing this study. In fact, the study started off as an imuna study, but I felt like there was probably a better way to go about it that's more personal and more meaningful. And then we can understand imuna. Now we know why we're here. We're on a mission. Nothing happens to us, it happens for us. For some divine reason, even tragedies and hardships and trials transform us into who we're supposed to be. Loss transforms the soul into what it needs to be. We looked at soul missions and soul groups and how this dynamic plays out across the entire world. It's like the butterfly effect concept. One little thing here impacts so many people and vice versa. We have so many of these in our lives we just can't see, but this is how it works for the soul. It reminds me of this Talmudic story. One of the Roman emperors, we'll call her a wife, might not be that, but she says, "Hey, Rabbi, tell me what your God does. He created everything. What does he do with his time now? Does he just sit around?" And the rabbi says he pairs people up. He matches people up, right? It's this idea of he matches people up for marriage. Now, there's an easy way to look at that. He picks people to marry, and they get married, and so be it. There's another way to look at this too, and I'll come back to that. But the empress, she says, "I can do that." And so she takes all of her slaves in her house, and she mixes them all up. You're marrying that one, you're marrying this one. And I think it was the next day, they were all battered, and you could tell like it wasn't going well. And she admits, "Okay, this is a lot harder than I thought." The deeper way to look at that, I think, is that there's more than just marriage going on. God is air traffic controlling all of our lives and all the ways they intersect in ways that we don't see all across the world. And just for the fun of it, if you're into like the multiverse idea of physics, and this exponentially grows into like an infinite air traffic control map of what, and then why couldn't God do that, right? Just, brainstorming. But I think that's what that's about. And so God is doing all of this work on our behalf. We're connecting with people. Incidents are happening around us. It changes us. We learn from them. We grow. And that's kind of what we talked about in a nutshell. That might be a deeper study on its own. And then, of course, we had to look at the concept of Gilgul, because it essentially does look like, in the tradition and in personal accounts, there might be this ability to replay where we messed up. And of course, there are some stipulations around that. Of course, it's not the ideal. That's not how things were designed, but nevertheless, there's enough circumstantial evidence in the tradition and in research that there's something else going on there. So with that, I want to jump into this week. As always, if you have a question, a big question, and you know it'll take a little bit to answer, I'm going to leave more time at the end. We'll go through it. But if there's something I said and it needs to be clarified in the moment, you don't want to lose the thread, just throw it in the chat and I'll try. I have it right in front of me. I'll make sure I don't miss it this time. So for this week, I want to look at NDEs first. I want to look at NDEs because there's a certain consistency in a near-death experience account that is eventually going, in some cases, becomes an actual death experience. But an NDE has a certain set of steps that are very much the same. Yeah, so Emunah, when we look at the word faith, Emunah is often translated as faith. And faith is very different in your tradition. Faith can just be belief in a system, belief in a doctrine, belief in, it's a very fluid term when you ask people to define faith. Emunah, though, on a deeper level, the word of Emunah is something we work at. It's like a craft. It comes from the word uman, which means like a skill, something you develop. In the mystical tradition, Emunah is a state of mind you tap into or you work to tap into. In this case, knowing that there is a soul that survives physical death and living with a foot in that reality at all times is Emunah. That's proper Emunah. That's recognizing, and this is what the Torah tradition, the New Testament, Pirkei Avot, all throughout the rabbinic literature is. Pirkei Avot says this world is a vestibule, right, to a banquet. Prepare yourself here for the banquet. And then, of course, you see the banquet theme all throughout the New Testament. It's this idea that, hey, this isn't everything, everyone. There's another world after this, where the meek shall inherit the earth, right? There's an inverted world, and I have a story about that at the end I'll share. But I think that's Emunah. Emunah is tapping into that reality, as the Ramchal says, living with a foot in this world and a foot in the world to come. That's how we are to go through our lives. So NDEs. NDEs are super fascinating because there are more of them every year. I have some stats on how many, but there are probably hundreds of millions across the world if we look at our national statistics and we just kind of expand them to a lot of the countries that have any kind of a medical system that have the ability to revive people. People code and they come back and then they have this story. And they weren't exactly out. They weren't exactly dead. And I know many people who've had those personal experiences. If you're interested, there is a group. I don't know how, I've heard them come up in my research before. I don't know how widespread they are, how long they've been around, but it's interesting to know there is a research foundation. So if you do have a story of your own and you want to contribute that, it seems that they have an intake for that. You can share your story. And they have videos and some research. And it seems like there are groups, there are pockets of people doing research, but it seems like they're probably the most organized that I've seen so far. So it seems there are an estimated 770 some cases every day in America where someone passes. And a certain percentage of that, like 10% or so, report something happening to them while they were out. Often, and I'll go through the steps of this in a moment, but there's a repeatable pattern. They're not all the same, and I have a theory for that, and I'll talk about that as we get to it. But most of them are the same. They share a lot of the same dynamics and steps. And I think that's fascinating because if you have people in different parts of the world, different time zones, different eras of time, I mean, hundreds of years ago, biblical era, right? There's some biblical era Talmudic accounts. Other cultures have them in their works. And if they have similarities, you pay attention to that. When you see hundreds and hundreds of cultures have these experiences and they're very similar, that's a significant data point. So I would say from the outset, some people who recount an NDE. Some people have built that into their soul program when they took their life and they mapped it out, and their soul group mapped out their life, and God allowed them to transition into a body, whatever that looked like. Some people seem to have put an NDE in their life as sort of a milestone, a checkpoint to I don't know, kind of like check your priorities. How are you doing? Are you on track? Are you off track? It's like a mid review, right? Some people don't have that experience. They just, it happened to them and they're utterly confused the whole time, and they come back amazed and their life changes. So the interesting group, check them out if you're interested. I might bring them up in some other articles of mine in the future as I go through their content, because the content's pretty interesting. The Jewish tradition does have, actually in the tradition, of course, the Bible doesn't spell these things out. You can see mentions of experiences people have of souls in the afterlife and such, but there isn't a lot of that explained in the text. It comes through the rabbinic tradition. And there are reasons why I think the New Testament is based off of that versus, I mean, obviously, outside of the anachronism, the New Testament is anchored in that rabbinic tradition, and there's a lot in there that people just aren't aware of. Rob Pinson, in his book, Life After Life, identifies between the Torah tradition and call them everyday accounts in the US or the world, 10 steps that more or less happen throughout these experiences. And they're super interesting because they all happen in different phases, or someone might get trapped in one, or they might get sent back earlier. But if you make it through, the bell curve of experiences, there are about 10 distinct steps. And I'll go through them here. So the first step, and some people in these accounts, they're not aware of it at first, if you've ever heard these accounts. The first step is kind of a becoming aware of the idea that you're no longer in a physical body somehow. And I've heard people say this, there's a moment of disorientation. They're actually watching their body and they're not exactly sure what's going on. They just see it. And it's then they realize, oh wait, that's me. That's the shirt I'm wearing right now. Why am I looking at myself from a distance, right? It's this idea that there's a moment of transition that your mind doesn't quite catch up. That's fascinating because when you leave the physical body, this coincides with the idea that the soul, even though it's no longer in physicality, the soul isn't omniscient. It doesn't have omnipotence. It still has things to learn. It still has free will. And that'll come into play in a moment in some of these steps. But the soul doesn't instantly gain access to all knowledge of all time and all space. The soul is still navigating these experiences, even after a full death. But in the NDE, for sure, there's a moment of, in a lot of people's experiences, this like, where am I? A friend of mine told me about an experience he had. He woke up in a hospital bed and he was talking to a nurse, but it didn't look like the same room. So his visuals were anchored on this hospital bed, but it wasn't the room he was actually in. And only afterwards did he realize, after a couple of moments in this experience, did he realize, oh, I'm not in the physical world anymore. But it's very different. It's different for people. People, actually, I will say before an actual death, about 6 weeks before someone is passing, call it natural causes, they will start to see family and friends and people who have passed visit them. When I started learning about this years ago, my grandmother was declining in her home. She was like under a not a retirement home. It's assisted living, but she got to the point where she basically, in the last 6-7 weeks or so, she was going downhill pretty quickly, and her care was increased. Well, she started to tell me about these experiences, and it was right on time with the tradition I was reading at that time. And I would ask her about it and say, "Hey, did you see so and so?" And she would have this elaborate story, this explanation of what happened and the conversation they had. And sometimes she would just offer it up on her own. But it seemed to be on time. And other studies as well say that people will visit within that month of them passing. So that's an interesting concept. Obviously, with an NDE, it seems they're a little less planned on that side, or they're not quite it's known that they're not going to transition to a death in most cases. So it's not quite the same, but that's a distinction I'll make here. The next one is peace and tranquility. So it seems that once a soul starts to realize, oh, I'm no longer among the living, they feel this wave of peace and calm and acceptance. And it's not that they don't care about the physical world, it's just they transcend all of the stress and struggle and strain that we live with every day. They feel this light, freeing experience. They feel love. They feel a gentle pull, an organized, gentle pull. And I'll talk about that in a second here. But it's like, oh, I'm okay. We do live past this. I will see everybody again. And they kind of, some people get very lost in that. They don't want to come back. It's too positive and loving of a feeling to want to come back into the physical world and all the headaches and the trouble that we have. There are cases, and I've talked to some of you individually about this. There are cases of NDEs online people have. I don't know that I trust all of them. I think I said that last week or in week one. Some of them, they just, I don't know, there's like a sensational factor to them. But there are people who do say that they experience hell or a burning, terrible experience. I do think Gehenna is a real thing. I see it in the Jewish tradition though. I don't see it as an eternal, just my where I am in the moment. But I will say that there are these, I call them confused, disorienting experiences. And when someone goes into the world of souls, it's an utterly disorienting and terrible experience. And it's an experience of confusion. And it's also sometimes absolutely terrifying, and it corrects them. Their life never goes back the same. Okay, interesting. A couple ways that could happen. Number one, that could be their milestone, their turning point that helps get them back on track for whatever it is they're here for. Then there is also in the Jewish tradition this idea called the Olam Hadimyon. Rav Pinson talks about it. It's mentioned in some later Hasidic works as well. Olam Hadimyon is it's the world of imagination, but you could translate it as confusion in this case. And I think I'll talk about this at step 4. There's a reason we enter into this confused, disorienting space. A lot of NDEs will make it through that space. It won't be your entire experience. It's just a transition phase of where you're in some, like, call it bad energy. That'll make sense in a moment. But Olam Hadimyon is a place where you could actually spend time not knowing that you've actually passed. You're just confused. Your cultural visuals are forming your reality. You think you're in a physical body. This starts to get into the concept of a dibuk, or a disembodied soul that starts to wander. And we see that in the New Testament and all throughout the biblical traditions, this idea that a soul gets kind of trapped and they need to be kind of moved through this space and set free. Olam Hadimyon seems to be what I think some NDEs get trapped in. Not all, thankfully not all. I'll talk about that when I get to section 4 though. But most people have this experience of peace and tranquility, and they feel pulled. They feel like, I'm not just standing here. There's a place I'm supposed to go, and I instinctively know this. And they start to move in that direction. They may even have family and friends there visiting them, coming to see them in that moment, right? Even souls in the world of souls have free will. They can do such things, and I'll talk about that as well. But they can interact with the living. They can be around when somebody goes through an experience and is disoriented. They can be there to help. But generally, peace and tranquility, overwhelmingly, that's what people feel. And I know some of you on the call have had that, and have multiple have explained that it's very difficult to go back from that point, because it changes you. Emergence of sounds and smells. So this is super interesting. Some people hear music, or they hear a humming. There's often this idea of the soul making a pop sound when it leaves the body. Some people have said they've heard that. And then after the pop, there's just this this very peaceful kind of music playing. Sometimes it's your favorite music. Sometimes it's not really a kind of music you've heard. It's just like a symphony of frequencies and sounds. And it's peaceful, it's calming. And people have this experience. The smells is super interesting because the idea of the soul in the Hebrew language, many of the words are tied to breath and the nostrils, right? God breathed through his nostrils through the nostrils into the soul of the human, making him a nefesh chaya. So the Hasidic and the Kabbalistic tradition key off of smell. The neshama is connected with smell. The upper world is connected with just scents, beautiful scents, things you've never really smelled before, but they smell good. So really interesting that people who have no awareness of that tradition have relayed that. Again, you come back to how did the sages know about this? Where did they learn this idea from? So beautiful sensations. And again, we're not dealing with physical sensory stimulus. We're dealing with spiritual, whatever that looks or sounds like. It's really hard to kind of imagine. At some point, the soul who passes to that other side in an NDE, or even not in an NDE, they can hear conversations around them, right? They can hear people somebody in our Torah club here spoke about their NDE, and they experienced, and they're not on the call, but I'm sure it's okay to say, they experienced conversations all throughout the hospital. They could hear all these conversations, which is amazing because you can't hear, obviously, outside of your room typically. And in this case, it matches the tradition. You're hearing outside of physical limitations now. You're in a new reality. The Guf Dak. So this is super interesting. In some traditions or the not so religious accounts, they'll say it's an energy body or an ethereal quantum realm or whatever. I don't know how all those terms line up, but in the Torah tradition, if you remember back to week 1, I gave you that Kirlian photography image where it showed the energy field around the body. You can actually map that. Some people might call that an aura. Some people might say it's a electromagnetic field that all living things give off. Our planet gives off an electromagnetic field. Everything does, plants do. So that field, believe it or not, that field is actually vibrating in the frequency of our emotions. So our emotions and the words we use and our thoughts and our general state of being, some might call that our spiritual levels. That field is actually influenced by all of that internal stuff that I think a lot of people were trained or told doesn't really matter. You have the bad thoughts, just don't say them. Or right, it's this idea that what's going on inside doesn't matter. Well, the tradition seems to align with these accounts that it very much does matter. Our spiritual makeup, who we are, the words we use, our thoughts, our how much fear we're operating from. Are we operating from a victim mindset? That pollutes that field around us. So the tradition, in the Torah tradition, rabbinic tradition, says that our soul, our neshama, and ruach can actually get stuck in that field momentarily because it has to be rectified. And there's kind of like a resonance that has to happen for the soul to move past it. So you can see how somebody who's in a very dark state spiritually might get stuck in that for quite a while. And again, that comes back to what I said, the disorienting, terrible feeling when somebody leaves their body. There's this terrible feeling of everything's wrong. It's terrible. It's torturous. It's negative. It's scary. That's what a dibuk gets stuck in, more or less. So when a disembodied spirit tries to leave, they get stuck in that field. And I think NDEs are subject to that as well, because they're not really dead. By the tradition, and I'll talk about this later, the tradition, you're not really dead until after a few days. So an NDE, you're not anywhere near that. But you can get trapped in these liminal spaces, these transitional phases, if you're not doing that spiritual work. And I do think that sometimes when you listen to the story of the people who give those terrifying NDE experiences, they'll tell you often their life was pretty far off the rails. So again, it aligns. I don't know that they're all true, but there is that pattern. If a certain percentage of them are true, they'll mostly tell you they were living a bad life. They saw hell and then they were scared straight. Interesting. But just know that all of the work of Musar, spiritual ethics, discipline, mitzvot, everything that we do, acts of kindness, cleaning up our speech, right? Speaking life versus speaking death, all of those things contribute to this field around us. And there's a lot that we should, that's a topic on its own. Physical health is downstream from that. But in the case of when somebody passes, you could actually get stuck in that for quite a while. And there are stories in the Talmud of that nature, where a soul is still trapped in it for quite a while. Super interesting though. If the person, for some reason, is unable to get out of that reality, they're stuck here. They have the free will to stay, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. A soul has free will, so they may actually, in this case, in I hope hopefully extreme minority cases, for certain reasons, they will get trapped in looking for physical expressions of life. And this might be someone who really just lived a life of physicality, lusts of the flesh. You can think of how these terms are laid out in biblical concepts, but it's, in other words, a soul that doesn't quite want to leave physicality. The book that I shared in week 1, Minchat Yehuda, is one that goes into those stories. It's not the nicest of reads. It can be kind of a sad read because you're reading about these souls that have to be more or less exorcised from that reality because they're so disoriented and confused. But I believe these things still happen today. A lot of people in the Western Christian tradition tend to not want to acknowledge it, but Eastern traditions and Eastern religions do still recognize, as does Judaism, that souls can get trapped and also inhabit bodies of people who are impure and have kind of also gone off the rails and made themselves vulnerable. That's a deep topic. I've written about it. I will tell you a personal experience, though. So years ago, a family member had passed. They had been taken into a house of another family member, and they passed away in the house with family. So on that side, it was a beautiful thing. Not long after, the house was sold. I mean, talking months, the house was sold, and the new owners were in touch with our family as they moved into the new house. And after a couple months, they kind of asked the question about, did someone pass away here? Because they were feeling what, by all accounts, would be a haunting. They were feeling a presence and something moving around and interactions going on. And the person in my family reached out to me and said, "Hey, this is an interesting thing. What do you think of this?" I am in no way skilled to put on like any kind of a business for this of any means. I know what I've read in the tradition and some of the means of helping to curate a soul's journey to that next step. I did some of those things from the tradition, and it seemed like it was resolved. Maybe it resolved on its own. Maybe that was helpful. But it's a very interesting fact that sometimes a soul, in this case, who really enjoyed physical life and stuff, can have a hard part of the soul can get stuck. I'll talk about that as well. Not all of the soul. Remember, the soul has multiple levels, but there are some parts of the soul anchored with the physical life at all times, even when we pass. Part of our nefesh is always anchored to the physical world, but some people have more anchored than others. And that can cause a bit of a, I don't know. I don't like the idea of haunting. I think haunting I think of like the way the popular culture uses that. But there's a confusion. There's a disembodied aspect that's moving around in the physical world, perhaps not aware that it, like the rest of it, has moved on. And there's a lot in that Life After Life and that Minchad Yehuda book accounts from the Torah tradition. Anyway, I still think that as long as you're doing work on Musar, you are seeking the Creator, you're tapping into Amuna. I think these are minimal experiences in terms of the general picture. People don't have these, thankfully, every day. It seems like these are a minority. But Olam Hadimyon is an interesting concept. It can also be kind of connected to the idea of purgatory. In my experience, when I grew up in the Catholic Church, purgatory was a real thing. In the Protestant church, when I worked in the Protestant church for 2 years, purgatory was sort of a taboo topic. We don't talk about that. And then when I got back to the Jewish world, like, oh, there is a purgatory. Okay. So, all these things are anchored in tradition and sometimes blocked, but I'll tell you that it's there. Yes, Craig, you're right. If you have not prepared, yeah, that's a good way to. That's what we do, right? That's why we're doing this study. We're preparing. The more you know, the more you can optimize your life. Okay, so people have moved past this phase. Sometimes they don't get stuck in stage 4 at all. They go right into a tunnel. And this is a very common experience. Some people describe it sounds more like interdimensional travel, to be honest, like in Star Wars, like the hyperdrive, something of that nature. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a tunnel exactly, but it's this idea that we return the way we came. There's some kind of a transition effect that happens when we leave the physical world and we go into the world of souls. There's it's a dimensional shift. And that's a very common thing. This process, though, all of these steps, by now, a soul has kind of realized, oh, I am definitely not in Kansas anymore. Like we're off on this new experience. They might start to see family and friends at this point as well at different stages. Interestingly, in Dr. Newton's book, some of the more advanced souls recount the idea that the more advanced the soul you are, the less you need all of that hand holding. You just kind of you're zipping into the next stage. But in these NDEs, these people often are describing this kind of tunnel experience. And by now they know kind of where they are. Through this tunnel, again, you are encountering loved ones, spirit guides. I think I mentioned that. Yes, Sandy, we come through the world in a tunnel and we leave. That's right. It's the way in, the way out. That's why I see it more of like a dimensional shift. Like if we were to all somehow go through 4th and 5th dimension into higher dimensions, I imagine it would be like this flash of light and time and space. It would be something like that. But yeah, so when people encounter loved ones, if they haven't already, like I said in the beginning, if you have a loved one who is nearing the end of their physical life and they start to see, and they seem like they're within that window, they'll also see them at this point. And this is where family and friends, I've heard amazing stories from friends and stories I've heard online of people starting to see those loved ones around them as they're physically passing. Like people might even sit up and reach out their arms. That's a phenomenon that some people have, or they'll say, "Oh, mom," as they sit up and their mom has passed on. But nevertheless, we're not alone. Again, our souls are never alone, even in this moment. People who have passed, we're still connected to them. But for sure, now they're getting confirmation that I'm not alone. We're seeing everybody again. This is amazing. We're going to see all the people who are behind, who haven't followed me into this experience. And the Torah tradition also talks about spirit guides. I mentioned that last week, but it is something that New Age kind of picks up on, or personal angels, or these kind of things. Sometimes it might be your personal guide that you mistake, right? Think about these levels of cognition that have to happen for a soul. Think of the world of imagination. You might mistake a guide or a loved one for someone else or God. There's often this experience where people in the early phases of an NDE, they think they met God. It seems like it's more often a family member or a spirit guide or someone they haven't quite remembered yet, because they'll also in the same story say, the person said, "Oh, no, 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 I'm not God," and they'll explain themselves if you know if they have a relationship that the person would remember. Nevertheless, your loved ones are there. So it's a very fascinating thing. When I was growing up in the Catholic Church, there was I forget if it was a sister or a nun. I'm going to go with sister. For the life of me, I don't remember, but she was well known in this Catholic community for being used as a message carrier from people who passed. And the idea was somebody would pass, somebody would be very upset, and if they couldn't get themselves on their feet after a bit of time, they would schedule time with her and she would meet with them. And she would describe things. It was like a mercy. It was a real mercy for these people. She would describe things that only someone giving her that information would know. She would describe family members that the spouse had connected with on the other side. And just beautiful stories. And I remember as a kid being really moved by that. My parents went to her once or twice. And I just remember people had it. To me, it wasn't, she wasn't a charlatan. There was some kind of a connection, and God was allowing some kind of information to let people get back on their feet and get past the mourning phase. And she was the only one I ever knew as a kid who had that ability. But it was fascinating because you do see this kind of experience in the Torah tradition as well. It's not very widely spoken of. And again, I think the important thing with a lot of these traditions is they don't want you spending a lot of time trying to connect with the other side. There's enough work to do here in our life that you don't want to spend the rest of yours trying to connect with people on the other side. And it's not the same as what Saul did with the witch, right? There's a lot of confusion. That's a very different type of manipulation. But people who genuinely want to know where a loved one is or they miss them, I think that's a very natural, organic experience on Earth. It's not the way things were designed necessarily, but it seems as if God does allow a spirit to connect. Yeah, Laurie. Yes. Yeah. Everyone will want to know. And some people really get stuck and they can't put the pieces back together. And it doesn't do anyone any good. So Hashem will allow these experiences. And when I grew up and I saw these experiences, people were radically changed. They would be in tears. They would have this wave of energy that went over them. They would move on. It's something that this woman shared with them when they would leave her room changed them. She communicated something. And I remember a couple that we had in our family, and the person was described being with another family member, and it was a beautiful way to help somebody pass the morning. And of course, right, God is a God of mercy. So all that to say, this idea that we are reunited with everyone is, I think, comforting. We see everyone again. They're also not really separated from us right now either. And I think we all have experiences of when an idea of someone comes into our mind or a thought or a memory, that might very well be a connection. They're saying, hey, I'm here, right? In my experience, I was meditating after praying one morning, and it's a very long story. I won't give you the long story. Some I've told you the story, but I had this experience, and it was a very real experience talking to my grandfather. I was very connected to. And he passed away just a little before we got married, almost 20 years now. And it was a few years ago I had this experience, and I said, I wished you could have seen our marriage. And he said, I did see it. It was beautiful. And it's this idea that they're not missing out on our lives. They can see what's going on. We're never really alone. They have other things to do, right? Their souls are also on to their next lesson. Who knows what's going on, but they're not concerned because they know we're going to see each other again. It's us downstream that need the reminding. So encountering loved ones, that's an important one, because I think for everyone who's lost someone, it's really important to know that they're here. And time seems to travel differently for them. It's probably seconds in their reality that will be there, right? Step 7, you sense the light. There's this idea of light, love, warmth. It's this knowing that there's a creator and there's this great source. It's this pulsating, I told you in the Jewish tradition, it's the Sha'ashua, this like ebb and flow of creation and formation that's going on. And it's the epicenter of the world of souls. And people are drawn to this in this experience. And this is where they may start to move into the next phase, this kind of life review. And this takes on many different forms, depending on how you lived your life. And the Jewish tradition speaks about this as well. But in general, you're looking at the life you lived in the third person. So think of the story with David. This is the traditional story that's usually relayed. Nathan comes to David and says, "What would you do about a man who did this to someone else?" And this other man had a sheep and he took the sheep, and David gets really angry and he says, "Well, that was you." That's kind of what the life review is like. You're watching this life of a person. You're aware that it's you, but you're watching it in full 360 ability to feel all the emotions and the reactions of those people who you didn't feel the reactions of in your physical life. You're allowed to feel it 360. Oh, you said this to that person. You didn't realize how much it hurt them. They didn't show you, but it hurt them, right? You're getting this full idea, but you get to see the wins as well. Often we look at the negative side of it, but there are also a lot of wins. A lot of people who go through the life review. There was an Israeli kid years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago, who went through this experience. And he shared that it was the little things you did in life that you didn't think were big things. And it absolutely received this like thunderous applause in the world of souls. It could be something like comforting someone who lost a loved one, holding the door for someone who had a bad day. These things you don't really know are a big deal. Maybe returning a shopping cart, right? Something like trivial, but it's these little things that we're here for. And I think back to like weightier commandments of the Torah. We don't really know which ones are which, but there is this idea that even the very little things we do are big wins in the world of souls. So we go through this life review. I tend to think the life review is a kind of atonement. You're going to see how your words hurt someone, but you're going to see it from your elevated state of a neshama. And you're going to see it more clearly and you're going to learn from it. So the life review, in a sense, could be a very challenging experience when you think about it. Like it's like replaying your biggest mistakes that you did 10 years ago when you didn't know any better. Now you know better, you think back on them and you cringe a little bit, right? I would have done it so differently today. I think the life review is like that, just exponentially, with much more awareness of all the impact. So that people talk about the life review. Some people say that really changed them. They came back. My friend I told you who had an experience, he was sitting in a hospital room. When he realized he was going back, the nurse in that visualization told him he's going back. He changed his life. He absolutely changed his life. And he was probably one of the most faithful, I don't know, devoted people you would meet. Like everything he did filtered through that experience because he wanted to get a better life review next time around. So for some people, it really does, it changes them. And all these lessons are important, right? I don't think you're grilled and punished so much for them. The way I see it, it's like a lot of the atonement process, not all, but a lot of it comes through that realization that you hurt other people. And, to some extent, you need to work on that. But you learned a lesson through it. Yes, that is, yes, some people say the shame, yes, Lisa, some people say that is a significant part of Gehenna. Because when you think about it, you're not looking at it from our current state. You're looking at it from your elevated state. And it's going to hurt more because you realize you were part of that experience for someone else. So yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think again, tapping into Amuna, think about your life review. How would this moment look in my life review? How does that change my decision-making process? It's very practical. At some point, usually in this journey, but at some point there's a realization that we're no longer in time and space in an NDE. Someone will say, I was in the world of souls for years, and it was 10 minutes on Earth that I was out. Or they might have some different experience altogether, but it's not one-to-one time. And that makes sense. If we're leaving the physical world, I see this time and space reality as sort of a simulation. The world of souls doesn't exactly operate on time. So at some point, there's a realization that we're in a whole different reality here. This isn't like what we're used to. And then, of course, for the NDE, there's a moment when someone says to them, "You're going back," and they might kick and scream against it, but that's an NDE. That changes though when somebody is returning to the world of souls. And in this case, like I said, and I have an article on this. It's the article about Lazarus. I cover it. The Jewish tradition says 3 to 7 days. Around the third day, the nefesh, the lowest part of the soul, is still with the body, but the neshama and the ruach are moving on. After about 7 days, the nefesh has departed as well, for the most part. There's always a little bit of the nefesh that stays back, anchored to the physical world. But an NDE comes nowhere near that. An NDE is usually under an hour, usually. Under half an hour in most cases. If it's more than that, that's rare, but they're still not dead for days, right? And again, that's in the Gospels when you see Lazarus is resurrected on day 4. That's significant because day 4 is past the 3-day mark, which is a milestone. So someone who's entering the world of souls, it's also known as Gan Eden. It's often called Gan Eden, often called paradise. And when you think back to when Jesus said, "Tonight we'll dine together in paradise," there's a lot implied in that statement. He either was very versed in the tradition, which I think he was, but he seemed to know the process. How many people know where they're going to be that evening, right? Like you pass away in the morning, where are you going to be in the evening? Oh, Gan Eden. Like not many people are aware of that, like that progression of steps. Anyway, so I always find it interesting. There's a lot more said in that passage than people are often aware, but it's often called the Garden of Eden, the spiritual Garden of Eden, the third heaven. There are all these terms for this kind of like holding place of the souls. And it's not the final place. Again, I think the souls continue to grow and elevate. And I have a quote on that. But even after you get to the world of souls, you're continuing to grow and elevate and learn. Some souls need time after a life on earth. It might be a very challenging life. They might need time to decompress and heal. And it seems the world of souls allows that. They bask in the light of the Creator, the rabbis will say. But personal accounts talk about this too. They might need the equivalent of months or earth years. It could be like decades to just chill out. I need to come recenter with who I am and all that I learned and think through that life and reconnect with the Creator. Living on earth, as we said, is a very difficult thing. It can take a toll. At some point, they might go to their counsel or their guide, and they might review their life again. Or if for some reason it happened in that first experience, they go through it, but a little bit more in depth, the decisions you made. And it's usually described as in the tradition at this point, because there aren't people who really come back from the dead at this point, right? We're talking about a real full out experience. In the tradition, it's usually seen as more kind. It's not a harsh judgment or a punishment. It's sort of looked at, okay, well, you did well here. Here's where we should work, right? These people, these souls are loving. The Creator's loving. So anyone that's curating these experiences is in it for the long-term growth. In the case of someone who has to go through a Gehenna-like purification experience, the Jewish tradition says it can be up to 12 months. But then the question is, well, what is 12 months, right? And that tradition, of course, ties into when we say Kaddish each week or each morning. In Shabbat, we say it, but on each morning we say it. For someone who passed for almost a year, we say it because we want to like help them through that process. Of course, you can say Psalms for them as well and kind of ease that process, but there might be a need to decompress, purify, and heal. Um, the world of souls is always described as beautiful, peaceful, energy. It's made of energy and structures that are made of light and structures of energy, but it has a similar quality to, um, yeah, I'll come back to that question, Yvonne. It's a similar quality to life on Earth. It can even take on the visuals of your life on Earth. If a soul needs some kind of familiarity, which I think is a mercy as well, that's very kind. Instead of making a disorienting reality, I remember accounts of people who saw a loved one who passed. They were in a childhood home or a place that they really liked, and it was beautiful and the weather was nice. It's just kind of like a visualization that helps them make that journey back. The idea, Yvonne, about a year is it's up to a year for someone who needs a lot of purification. Not most people don't have that experience, and they coincide it with kind of the way the body um, degrades. So by that point, the body has degraded, and the soul is released. It's a very deep tradition. I don't think I've covered that one in any articles, but they, for the sake of a year, just in the event that someone does go through a kind of longer experience, we say Kaddish for almost a year, just to make sure that we are making that transition smoother for them. And it's a good way to also remember their yahrzeit, the day that they passed away, so that you can continue to think about them and connect with prayer. So yeah, Ralph Pinson says that once a soul leaves the body, it forever expands and attains deeper and more profound levels of connection. Deveka means connection, cleaving with the creator, the source. Um, Basically, the soul never stops learning and growing, which is fascinating, right? You would think that, oh, we're in heaven, we know everything, but no, there's so much more to learn. If the creator is infinite, we're never going to quite um, grasp what that means. So we continue to develop. Souls that have passed, both in the personal accounts and the Jewish tradition, do have the ability to connect with us. As I was doing the study for this, I might have mentioned this week one, I was thinking about family members and calling to mind the stories as I was mowing the lawn, and a butterfly was around me and wouldn't leave me alone. I was trying not to hit it with the string trimmer, but it wouldn't leave me alone. It was like unusual. And I was thinking about this concept because this is part of what I was building at the time. But they might communicate through dreams. The Torah tradition talks about this as well. Rob Pinson covers it in his book. They might be able to reach us in our dreams, because in our dreams, we're not distracted by life stuff. We're not distracted by stress. The brain is venting that day's stress out, and we may have a dream. And I've seen people who've had a dream of a loved one that passed, and they wake up and it's very real to them. I know some people are weird about dreams. They don't like the idea of dreams as a communication tool, but it is part of the tradition on these accounts. Animals. Yes, Sandy. So in our when we sleep, the tradition recounts that most of our soul departs the physical world and recharges in the upper world. So even on the subconscious or superconscious level, we're probably connecting with loved ones and friends every single day, for what that's worth. But in our conscious level, for some reason, we're not allowed to retain that. It would probably disrupt us, I think. I always come back to that. It would just disrupt our progress. Yeah, so animals might be part of that. I've seen cases where, this one case, a woman said, "When I'll send you a cardinal," right? And this family recorded later that evening, after the mother had been buried, a cardinal wouldn't leave their front porch. It just kept hopping all over the front porch, and it wasn't scared. So make of it what you will. There is this idea that these little messengers can be sent to coincide with a memory or a thought. So pay attention to those thoughts when these things happen. Even people who aren't religious, and I would think are relatively disconnected, have seen signs and they knew who it was that was sending that to them. So we have this innate ability inside of us to stay connected to loved ones who have passed. It's just our conscious day-to-day living and our disconnect from that spiritual world makes it harder for us to pick up those messages. But many people have them, these ideas of connecting with someone after death. And I shared a story in the WhatsApp. I think it was pretty interesting. So some closing thoughts here, and then we'll go to some questions. No matter how you look at it, the Torah tradition speaks in poetic, metaphoric language. The science, the research, the personal accounts, often more simple, modern expressions, but there's a lot that's shared, a significant amount. And I don't think we should ignore that. The mission, as far as the Torah tradition is, we come here, we're to climb out of the darkness and seek the Creator and grow. The personal accounts might say our mission is more about healing, rectifying, gaining knowledge, helping others. I think it's saying the same thing. At the end of the day, a lot of it's the same. Our purpose to bring the light of the Creator into the world, Torah, mitzvot, good deeds. The accounts, again, living, experiencing, growing, sharing, and those good deeds are a significant part of that, how we interact with others, right? Living a life of solitude, not interacting with people, misses the point. Yeah, I see two questions. I will bring those up in the Q&A. Two thoughts there. The emphasis, how we treat others. Both of them are 100% in alignment that how we treat others is important. As we just entered the month of Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur are coming. We know from the prayers, your sins are not forgiven with the Creator if you have not been doing that lateral work with people around you. And of course, Yeshua, Jesus quotes that same idea. Before you leave your gift at the altar, right? Go back and resolve the issues with people on the earthly plane. So how we treat others is important in all these accounts, all the traditions. So that's important. Repair. Mistakes are rectified in a number of ways in life and in the afterlife. And the same thing in these accounts. We learn that trials and challenges come to us, not just to grow us, but sometimes to atone for mistakes we've made. What you reap is what you sow, or something of that nature. Like what you do to others will come back to you. So love your neighbors yourself, right? Again, all of this means that love your neighbors yourself has a much deeper context. And then again, this eternal punishment idea, we've covered this with the week 2, I think it was week 2, the levels of the soul. Some of the levels of the soul are not subject to being punished because they're not subject to impurity. The neshama is not subject. So we're really looking at the nefesh and the ruach. That really changes what we're talking about. It changes the whole script of what the punishment would look like. In the end, God restores. He's a God of restoration. Evil is healed and repaired. But it does matter what we're doing in the now, right? We should always strive to tie up the loose ends, live by the wisdom that God has given us, and just try to live the best we can so that we don't have to go through these experiences, that we can actually, benefit other people with our life as well. I don't think, and you can see how someone might take all of this and say, oh, good, we live again, so it doesn't matter what I do with this life. And I think that's essentially what the Greeks believed. And I think that's why Paul had such a hard time with some of the people that were coming to him. So does this mean we sin, let sin abound? Of course not, right? You can see how this could be misconstrued. The idea is we ace this experience we have, we hurdle those challenges, and we do the best we absolutely can because we're learning in the end, and we're doing it on the collective level. So final thought, there's a story. I've shared this story many times. I love it. An incident involving a guy named Joseph, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, and he was ill. And it sounds like he passed away. He had an NDE. It's in the Talmud, Bava Batra 10. And he returned to health at some point. He didn't die. But his father said to him, what did you see when you were gone? So his father knew there's no way he didn't have some kind of experience. What did you see? Right? And he said, I saw an inverted world. Those above who are considered important in this world are downranked significantly. And those who are on the lower level of society right now are at the highest level there, right? So the humble, the meek shall inherit the earth kind of idea. I think it's the same tradition. And the father says, you saw the right, that's a clear world. You saw the world of souls, basically, is what he's saying. You saw what life is supposed to be like. And he said, what about the Torah scholars? What about the people who are living to be better people? And he said, we're important in this world and in that world. Um, you could also take the route that, oh, if I just mediocre, then like I'm mediocre in both worlds. I don't think that's the goal. The goal is that have your priorities right here, knowing that that's the model we're trying to attain. And it's a great story, but it's this idea that we know there's another world and we know that that's the ultimate destination. So get your questions. We have some time for them. I see two things. I'll start in reverse order. Claudia, yeah, so in the rabbinic tradition, animals do have a soul. They have a nefesh, and some would even say like a type of ruach. It's not the same ruach that or a nefesh that a human would have. Um, I don't know that they really. There's kind of like an ethic that Jewish Orthodox Jewish people don't really have pets. We have pets. We love our pets. I have heard people pass and say that they saw pets in the world of souls. I like to think that there are pets there. I've heard stories of thinking back to that nun that I was talking about. She told, actually, this is one of the stories that kind of shocked some people. She said, yes, your husband is fine, and he's with the golden retriever, and they have a house with a nice picket fence in the front of the yard. And the fact that she mentioned the golden retriever floored the woman because she didn't mention that. And this woman had somehow picked up that he was with a golden retriever. So even from a little kid, I've kind of been partial to the idea of pets being there. They do have a degree of soul. And all of creation's restored. So I can imagine animals not being a part of it. Just in my view. Yeah, so Muslims have dreams of Yeshua, like a Jewish version, sometimes, I'm sorry, a Muslim, Islamic, Arabic version. It's interesting. It's certainly interesting. I think that there's a lot to dig in there. A lot of these NDEs, people will see their religious leader, whoever that person is that's most important in their culture. I personally think some of that is because you're not really dead, or you're still in the land, you're still in the living, you're still subject to those degrees of, on one hand, confusing everything with God or an angel or whatever. But on the other hand, the world of souls is giving you a visual representation that you will understand. Because what good would it do if everything's in like 5D and you miss the message because you're so confused with what's going on around you at all times, right? So you see, like, there are almost these familiar colloquial scenes created that are it helps you have a foundation to then get the message. When I had my conversation in my dream with my grandfather, it was in a very normal looking park. Wasn't, and he had a look about him that was from when I remember him as a kid, not the last few years of his life. So I don't know. I think some of these, there's a lot to dig in there. There's a lot of reasons why it could be this or that, or it could be straightforward what they heard. But I think that my research has made me think that some people are also making things up for likes and clicks as well. So I take everything at face value until I can kind of get a little deeper into it. But YouTube kind of creates this, I don't know, this platform where people have some stories that are a little hard to believe. But I mean, I don't have to believe it for it to be real for them either. So, but something worth exploring for sure. Any questions from any of the weeks, really? We have 10, 15 minutes or so. And you can feel free to come off of mute if it's hard to type. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
So it was interesting when I heard this description of the panorama and a couple other things you said. I came to your church from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and that's where I learned about the law and Sabbath and some mistakes that were made by Protestant understandings and that kind of thing. But I don't know if you know this, but from their prophet and from their spiritual insiders, they also believe and teach this concept of panoramic review of your life, but they tie it more so into the judgment of your life before God, which I guess you're kind of saying the same thing, tying it into this concept of Gehenna being a place to work out your judgment also. But so I just wanted to tell you that, and also mention that they believe in regards to something I saw on one of your charts that said um, something about the pain of this world, you know, moving on with you after all your repairs. Um, they teach a similar thing. And I think personally that this is part of the foundation of what is going to be your new life. In other words, the reason why your new life under the rules of God is not a life built on sand, but built on, you know, concrete, if you will, is because of this type of thing, because you went through everything it took to understand why these rules are so important, and you lived through it and you paid for it, and you came out the other side, and you certainly will not sin again. But they teach, I thought it was interesting when I read it, because that church teaches that there are living beings in heaven who have not suffered the fall as we, when we are reconstituted amongst the subjects of the kingdom of God, we're going to be unique in the fact that we were such train wrecks, right? And we went through all this, and we walking around amongst these perfect beings who never fell with stars. And we are a wonder to those people according to what they teach. So I just thought I'd share that. I found it interesting when I saw that on the chart.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not familiar with their tradition, but they're echoes of like the Kabbalistic or Hasidic tradition, that there are these souls that never went through that fall of Adam. What happens in their experience is these are the souls that come into the world for a mission to help other people, but some of them don't incarnate. Like they actually just don't. And Dr. Newton's book has very similar accounts that some of these souls are like just on a different tier. But yeah, like ours is like a very unique experience. Even angels, you reminded me of that in your words. Like angels don't get this experience either. This experience of coming into this reality and living a life and learning and then growing. It's like even the everyday things we take for granted, like losing your keys. I don't know, like your battery dies, and like these little annoyances are amazing gifts in a sense that angels and some of these higher beings, they don't really have them. But yeah, it's interesting. I thank you for sharing that. I've not heard their tradition. I knew they had the seventh day thing in common, but I don't know much more than that. Yeah, so and Claudia, this kind of dovetails from Joe's to yours. You said in the panoramic view, will Yeshua offer a case for us to cover those areas we repented and asked for forgiveness with remorse? That makes sense. Yeah. So I gather that there are, from my understanding, multiple forms of a life review. It's not just one simple. There might be the simple one that people go through, but then there is more of a detailed, defined um, life review. And I think it's from that more detailed version, it seems that that's where the Gehenna shel sheleg, Gehenna shel esh, fire and snow idea comes from. And in a sense, you're kind of given this experience that matches how you lived your life. If you were cold and heartless, you get that experience. And you can see traces of that in, what is it, Luke, with Lazarus and the rich man. And then the Kabbalistic version of that is the beating in the grave, the Chibut HaKever idea. There is like a quick life review, and then it seems to me there are multiple levels of it. But I think that these are all disciplinarian in the end. You come through them kinder, you understand what you did and how to be better. It's not like I just don't see the popular tradition where you get to the other side and like some go to the place of clouds and some go to the place of fire and like that's it. Just don't see that anymore. Um, let me see, Rachel. The soul continues to expand and attain a deeper found connection with Hashem. Yep, that is both in the secular accounts as well, or the Dr. Newton's accounts and other that I shared earlier. Yeah, they get this idea that this growing is infinite. The world of souls in the place of peace energy, like the kind of soul spa. Yep, and it is. It's a it makes sense though, right? Like it's of course it would be. Like that's why some have even said that the trials on earth in some cases count as Gehenna. Some of the hardships that we have to live through here, like earth is kind of like at least from an atonement standpoint, some of the experiences you have here are like Gehenna. That's why I think the rabbis have a statement said um, poverty is its own Gehenna. People who live a life of poverty, they don't go through Gehenna. Basically, they've lived such a hard life. Like you've checked the box. Like you basically have um, you've sidestepped the need for punishment. You've lived a life of punishment. And I guess you think about people who live in like third world countries who are very deeply connected to God. On one hand, they're not distracted by the conveniences of life, but on the other hand, I mean, they probably have a much more freer spirit with all the I don't know, the way that their life has worked out. You can see how that would be the case. Yes, and Rachel, that is a very deep concept. The Gehenna is a place created by the Creator for a purpose of purification, so that we can then make it to the Olam Haba. So in a sense, and that's a shocking statement for some people, but Gehenna is a place of grace. At least in the Jewish tradition, you can get there a lot more easily than the traditions that I grew up with. Go ahead, Risa. I saw your hand. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you, James. How is there anything in Kabbalah that fits in with non-dual teachings like Advaita Vedanta, um, self-inquiry, people like Ramana Maharshi, what's his name? Um, Paramahansa Yogananda, that whole I am that, do you understand what I'm asking? Do you know
If
anything about them?
I don't. If you can explain it to me, though, it sounds. I'm curious to hear what the premise is for sure.
I'm not even, something just happened. I don't know how to explain it because I don't have that experience, but just basically self-actualization, enlightenment, and moksha, all these other kind of Hindu, I think, terms, that we are God, we are that, and that they are not just a spark, but we are that, and sort of we dissolve into that. I'm
Oh, yeah, yeah.
not
Okay, so
enlightened, so I don't can't say anymore.
yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, and I could be misunderstanding, but my general understanding from conversations with because I have a lot of neighbors who are Hindu. We've had some conversations about their beliefs, and I found that there are a lot of misconceptions in America about what their beliefs are. I was actually shocked by some of their beliefs and how similar they are. There's even in the Jewish tradition the idea that Abraham spread some of these teachings to the children of the East, and part of that tradition became Hinduism in time, and that there's this group called Brahmin, and it's some people etymologically connect that with Ibrahim. Um, but I was gathering some ideas of kind of like their end game, and there it does to me, and I could be misunderstanding, but it does seem as if all everything is nullified into nothingness, into like one with the Creator. I don't see that in the Torah tradition in the same way, because we're never going to be exactly the Creator, the way I understand it. We are always going to be an other or a created entity, but we're a more refined created entity. But if we ever reach full godhood, then um, that's a little problematic in the Torah tradition. And plus, I personally don't love the idea of like, I think of the movie Soul. If anyone has seen that, the Pixar movie, they all like it's kind of like a joke, the way that they did it, I think. but like everyone kind of goes into this bug zapper and like just disappears. I don't see it like that personally. It's a very high level of God to view as an entity we will never reach. We'll never attain that level, but we will continue to refine for all of time and still never reach the creator. Like to me, he transcends infinity. Whereas in the Hindu version, I think we all kind of like blend into whatever that status is called and cease to exist at that point. And I
James,
don't think that's a Torah tradition. Go ahead, Greg.
I didn't see where my little hand could be raised.
Oh, sure.
When we're talking about the lampstands in the temple,
Mhm.
and we're speaking about Aaron and his two sons, and the importance here is that Aaron's two sons died. They thought they were doing this great service to God, going into the temple, and these two sons were, in the eyes of God, two priests, okay, that God loved. But yet, God took their lives. And the reason being is that we as souls, and when we transfer through this life, and when we go into that other realm, the word is pretty clear, Torah everywhere. It says nobody can see the face of God and live. Okay. And so they went in with this expectation, possibly, and allowed there's this part of us in souls called me, myself, and I. And as long as we have me, myself, and I driving the cause in our life, we are reverting back to a lower level of a spiritual soul state. We have to escape that. We have to put that aside, and we have to hold that relationship with God to the highest degree within our soul. And that comes from surrendering our soul to God, letting him have it all. When I was on my deathbed, living on a feeding tube, and when I had my experience and it changed my life, I can tell people, the comforter of death, if you really, really are there with that comforter of death, God is a merciful, loving, caring God, but you cannot go there expecting to see the face of God. I write in my writings, in one of the books I'm writing, and one other I wrote, I expressed in there the knowledge and the experience that you have. You have to set all that aside. You no longer are, as you're getting ready to prepare your soul to cross on to this next to walk through this next gate on the pathway or on the way. Okay, so we have to allow ourselves to let God take what he gave to us, what he created. It's his possession. That's our soul. And when we get there, I will share this, and I hope people understand this. We have a name on earth, but our soul's name with God is a totally different name, and it's totally unknown to us. And the expressed concern here is that there's no way we're going to ever achieve being God. God is omnipresent. He's omnipotent, and he is truly our creator. And if we accept him as our creator and we allow him to be the owner of our souls, then these, as Paul so clearly said, these jars of clay, if we allow these jars of clay to carry out the roles that we're supposed to carry out on this earth, be sensitive to the Holy Spirit, the comforter of God, be sensitive to that relationship, and allow that leading in your life, because that's where true joy and happiness will lead you to be able to transcend into this greater realm of life that's so much greater than this place.
You know, so a lot of what he said too, if you think of the Hasidic tradition, there's a lot that Craig just said that coincides with that our soul has a name of purity. That's a very deep idea.
Yes.
And I think you affirmed what is the reality that we will never be able to, like the Hasidics talk about nullifying yourself. That's how you connect with God. Well, good luck with
Yeah.
that, because
Yeah.
we only
The
know
main
that.
the main thing that we're looking for is that safe place, and that safe place is in Hashem. And there's, getting there, that safe place is, we call it love, we call it many names, but God has given us that wonderful relationship to abide with us, and that's the truth. I'm going to turn off my mic.
No, amen. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. It's excellent. I love that we all have these different walks of life and different traditions, but we've kind of transcended those boundaries, and we're all kind of seeing the same thing, which is beautiful. That's what I'd hope for with this group.